And we're back. So last week, Jackson Hole, Wyoming split in two. And what I mean by this is the Jackson Hole Economic Policy Symposium happened. And this is where central bankers outline the future of global monetary policy. And just a few miles away at the Wyoming Blockchain Symposium, industry leaders, lawmakers, and innovators were gathered at the exact same time. This wasn't crypto on the sidelines anymore. This was crypto, fintech, DeFi, and regulators all under the same roof in the same city, talking openly about the future of money. That shift is worth paying attention to because it's not theory anymore. It's happening in real time. This wasn't crypto devs in basements dreaming of what if. This was crypto sitting at the table with the Fed, the SEC, senators, and asset managers. And what makes this unique is Ripple's approach. Brad Garlinghouse has always said Ripple's goal is not to destroy the old system, but to work with it. In his words, a lot of what, and these are his exact quotes, a lot of what I am doing is meeting with regulators, meeting with very senior people at banks, and explaining to them how crypto, specifically XRP, can be used to solve real problems, not to circumvent regulation. Once people understand that, then it quickly becomes disarmed and it's no longer a bad word, cryptocurrency. That mindset is now reflected at the very agenda of what was this symposium. So, who was in the room? Let's look at who was on stage because this is where my mind started to shake a bit. First, we have Stuart Alderati, Ripple's chief legal officer, who guided Ripple through a multi-year lawsuit with the SEC. Michelle Bowman was also on one of the panels. She's the vice chair of supervision at the Federal Reserve. We also have Paul Atkinson hosting a panel, and he is the new SEC chair, ushering in Project Crypto, which is something he's created. And industry leaders from Franklin Templeton, BNY Mellon, which is a bank, and Ondo Finance. This wasn't a side event. It was a showcase of traditional finance and crypto, and they are finally converging as one. And here is some of the panels and connections to Ripple that I created. First up, we have the opening panel, which was called The State of Digital Asset Industry, and it was hosted by Anthony Scaramucci. Ripple has just launched an XRP MasterCard with Gemini. Very front news. We just talked about this. They've also acquired Hidden Road, a prime brokerage firm for digital assets, and they're applying for a U.S. banking license. And also their Ondo Finance partnership is building institutional grade tokenization. Everything Scaramucci framed about the digital asset industry connects directly to Ripple's strategy. The next panel up was View from Senate Banking with Senator Tim Scott. We have just recently seen Senator Tim Scott walking beside President Donald Trump, touring the Federal Reserve with Jerome Powell. And Tim Scott is pushing a crypto market structure bill, which already has bipartisan support. He even believes up to 18 Democrats could join him. But he did say he has one obstacle to this application. And that one obstacle is Elizabeth Warren, who has been a long opponent of crypto. This matters for Ripple because clarity in market structure is what Garlinghouse has called for years. With deadlines looming for this structure bill, the panel wasn't theory. It was about laws that could shape XRP's use in the US finance. and awareness from within that the current hurdles to accomplish this, which are people like Elizabeth Warren, who I honestly think cost the Democrats the election with her standing of an anti-crypto legislative authority. The next panel was the future of Bitcoin mining in America. And as I read through all these panels, I kind of like started like shaking because I had another idea of how I was going to do this video, but it shifted everything. And so I continue. The next panel was the future of Bitcoin mining in America. This highlights deregulation and energy policy. And here's the contrast. Bitcoin's energy footprint is massive, while XRP runs lean and efficient. If climate risks keep rising, which we have no reason to believe they won't, efficiency will matter more than ever. Building a new financial system on a high energy chain like blockchain feels like a lateral move to me, not innovative. XRP's low carbon profile puts it in the center of a new conversation. The next panel was why a legacy asset manager is embracing blockchain. And this was hosted by Jenny Johnson from Franklin Templeton. And just so you know, Franklin Templeton is a top 20 global asset manager. They've also filed for an XRP ETF with the SEC, which will be the first of its kind, along with other firms. What they filed for was an S1, which happened on March 11th of this year. And they did also filed an amendment, number 1, on August 22nd. The amendment is a normal process. It just counters any questions that the SEC has in order to approve the process. So it means that they're moving quite along on this process. Also, it is to be noted that many times there can be many amendments that are made before an approval is accepted. So all of this is normal. It's part of answering the SEC's questions. And for context, Bitcoin ETFs took 6 to 7 months to reach final approval. Ethereum's ETF took 6 to 8 months. Franklin Templeton's XRP ETF is now at the 5-month mark. So we're closing in on that 6 to 8 month time frame if we look at other assets similar to XRP. Before Bitcoin's ETF approval, Bitcoin was at around $40,000 a token. A year later, $100,000. It's even much more now. Ethereum, pre-ETF, hovered around $3,500. Today, it's pushing $4,900. If XRP's ETFs gain approval, it won't just unlock new buyers. It could let asset managers actually use XRP in the way Ripple was designed, which is moving money instantaneously, offering yield, empowering new rails for finance. The next panel that was up is called Is Financial Systems Upgrade? And it was hosted by Carolyn Winberg from BNY Mellon. And if you've been with me a few times, we've talked about BNY Mellon. And the fact that BNY has someone from their team leading this discussion made me think of what we discussed before. And if you are new, I'll just review really quickly. BNY Mellon announced that they will custody Ripple's stablecoin RLUSD. This isn't theory, it's actually happening in real time. BNY was quoted as saying, BNY and Ripple are jointly committed to paving the way for digital asset adoption at institutional scale and bridging traditional finance with crypto. This is exactly Ripple's mission, spoken from the oldest custodian bank in America. The next panel, Inside Crypto Project with the chair of the SEC, Paul Atkins. He also brought his Project Crypto, which lays out clear rules. It's about fair custody, super apps, DeFi integration, innovation safe harbors, and US crypto leadership. This is the exact clarity that Garlinghouse, the CEO of Ripple, has been begging for years. And it's not just the SEC. The President, Donald Trump himself, has called for America to be the king of crypto, framing this as a jobs and innovation issue, wanting to bring jobs back to America. The next panel, we have blockchain on-ramps and tokenization and payments. Right after we just heard the SEC chair say recently that he literally has a line out the door of Silicon Valley firms wanting to tokenize assets. This panel, in my opinion, drove this point home. And that's where Ripple and Ondo Finance come into play. And we've talked about Ondo before, but we'll go into it a little bit more. Ondo specializes in tokenizing real-world assets like US Treasuries and bonds. To put it in perspective, BlackRock, who works with Ondo, manages a $30 billion US Treasury ETF, one of the safest and most liquid assets in the world. Ondo doesn't go and buy treasuries directly. Instead, it invests in that ETF that BlackRock has and then issues OUSG wrapped around that asset. And what that is, a blockchain-based wrapper that represents the share of the ETF. That wrapper brings treasuries on-chain. And until now, Ondo tokens like OUSG have lived mainly on Ethereum, Solana, and a few other chains with institutional custodians. But Ripple's partnership changes the game completely. By integrating with XRPL, Ondo's Treasuries-backed tokens can now run on Ripple's rails, making them usable for cross-border payments, liquidity pools, and settlement flows. And here is what this unlocks. A bank in Asia could hold OUSG. They could swap it into Ripple's stablecoin RLUSD on XRPL, which is the ledger, and bridge through XRP to settle instantaneously in a local currency. For institutions, it means the ability to hold what's considered the safest asset in the world, US Treasuries, as an on-chain reserve that can actually be used in real time for finance, for corridors around the globe. It means money can move with the security of treasures and stability of the US dollar stablecoin and the liquidity of XRP, regulated, transparent, and fast. In short, Ondo is working with BlackRock to tokenize treasuries. Ripple is working with Ondo to move and settle them. That's the on-ramp for institutional money into crypto rails with the biggest and largest asset manager in the world. The next panel was banking supervision, a conversation with Fed Vice Chair Michelle Bowman. This ties directly into Ripple's next play, which is becoming a US bank, which they have applied for a national bank charter. This charter would allow them to settle payments faster, bypass costly intermediaries, and gain the kind of legitimacy they fought for since the SEC lawsuit began. They're also applying for a Fed master account that would plug Ripple directly into the Federal Reserve's payment system, letting it hold stablecoin reserves like RLUSD with the central bank itself. And not surprisingly, over 42 banks at the moment have tried to block this application. The fear is pretty obvious. If Ripple gains this access, it doesn't compete with banks. It could replace some of the core functions of what they've done before. And meanwhile, while all this is happening, Politics around the Fed are heating up right now. Just this week, we saw President Trump order to remove Governor Lisa Cook. She's seen as aligned with Jerome Powell's cautious stance on rate cuts. And although this is definitely something that has never been done, there's been kind of a bubble around the Federal Reserve and banking as far as politics. But this announcement has rattled markets because America's strength has always been that its central banks could move free from political interference. And here's the paradox. Short term, lower interest rates might drive more investments into risk on assets, including crypto. But if trust in the Fed erodes, global investors may start looking elsewhere for stability. So the banks that are opposing Ripple's banking license, the very structure of what they're protecting could be eroded by the actions that have occurred this week. So it feels like banks might be in a tight position or they're back against the wall as to how to go next as they deal with cryptocurrency and companies like Ripple. So the question becomes, with Ripple pushing for direct access to the Fed and politics reshaping who gets a say in the process, does this new pressure make Ripple's application inevitable? Or will opposition from banks hold it back just a little longer? Either way, the direction of travel feels set in motion. So when we look at all these panels together with Franklin Templeton, BNY Mellon, Ondo Finance, the SEC, the Fed, senators, a pattern starts to emerge. This wasn't a random mix of topics. It was a roadmap about tokenization, custody, regulation, banking access, the very lanes Ripple has been building into for years, asking for regulatory clarity. And what strikes me most is how natural the connection feels to me. Like I said, as I read through the panel list of discussions, I just kept thinking about the connections to Ripple, what they've been working on, who they've been working with. A few years ago, the idea of US senators, Federal Reserve governors, and the legacy asset managers talking openly about crypto anywhere, let alone Jackson Hole, Wyoming, would have sounded impossible. It would have sounded like something that would take years to occur. But today, it feels inevitable. The Wyoming Blockchain Symposium wasn't just about ideas. It was about infrastructure and adoption. And these conversations continue to line up with Ripple's playbook. XRP won't just be in the room. It'll be a part of the rails that money moves on. This is only the first quarter of the panels that I'll discuss. I'll be digging into the rest in upcoming episodes. And I think the picture will only get clearer from here. None of this is financial advice. It's literally just information to dissect, to use, to try and understand what is happening right in front of our faces. Please like, subscribe, and join me again. And thank you so much for being with me again today. Till next time.